The bruise on Zara Morrison's cheek had turned a sickening shade of purple by the time she stumbled into the dusty street of Red Bluff, California, one hand clutching her ribs where her husband's boot had connected with bone. It was August 1877, and the merciless sun beat down on the small Northern California town as she made her way toward the general store, each step sending waves of pain through her battered body. She had refused to cook his supper last night after working 16 hours washing clothes for the hotel, and Thomas Morrison had made sure she understood that defiance came with a price. Zara had been 19 when she married Thomas 2 years ago, believing his promises of a better life in California after her parents died of fever back in Missouri. He had seemed kind then, charming even, with his neat suits and talk of his successful freight business. The reality had revealed itself slowly, like a snake shedding its skin. First came the criticism, then the control, and finally the violence that had become as regular as the sunrise. She needed flour and beans, ingredients Thomas had ordered her to fetch so she could prepare his meals for the week. The irony was not lost on her. He beat her for not cooking, then sent her into town looking like she had been trampled by horses, expecting her to gather supplies to cook some more. Her hands trembled as she counted the coins he had thrust at her that morning, barely enough for what he demanded. The general store was blessedly cool when she entered, though the relief was short-lived. Mrs. Patterson behind the counter took one look at Zara's face and quickly looked away, as most people in Red Bluff did. Nobody wanted to get involved in a married couple's business, no matter how ugly it got. Zara gathered her items mechanically, each movement deliberate to avoid aggravating her injuries. She was reaching for a bag of flour on a high shelf, wincing as her bruised ribs protested, when a hand reached past her and lifted it down with ease. Zara turned to find herself looking into the most striking pair of gray eyes she had ever seen. The man was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, his boots dusty from the trail. "Looked like you could use a hand, madam," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow made her feel safer than she had in months. His gaze flickered to her bruised face, and something hardened in those gray eyes, a flash of anger that was not directed at her, but at what had been done to her. "Thank you," Zara managed, taking the flour from him and holding it against her chest like a shield. She did not want his pity, did not want anyone's pity. She just wanted to survive another day. "Name's Zeke Norton," the cowboy said, not moving away. "I'm new to Red Bluff, just signed on with the cattle outfit north of town. Don't mean to overstep, but that looks like it hurts something awful." Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks, shame mixing with the pain. "I'm fine. Just clumsy as all, fell down the porch steps." Zeke's jaw tightened, and she could tell he did not believe her for a second. But he simply nodded, respecting her need to maintain the lie even if it fooled no one. "Well, if you ever need anything, madam, the Bar 7 Ranch is just 5 miles north. Anyone there can find me." She wanted to tell him that his kindness was dangerous, that Thomas would kill her if he knew she was talking to another man, especially one who looked at her with such genuine concern. Instead, she just nodded and hurried to the counter to pay for her meager supplies. Zeke Norton watched her go, his hands clenched at his sides. He had seen plenty of hard things in his 25 years, working cattle from Texas to Montana, but something about the sight of that woman's battered face and the fear in her green eyes struck him deep in the chest. He made some purchases of his own, then headed back to the ranch, but he could not stop thinking about her. Over the next week, Zeke found reasons to come into Red Bluff more often than necessary. He learned from the talkative barkeep at the saloon that the woman's name was Zara Morrison, and that her husband Thomas was a mean drunk who ran a struggling freight business. The barkeep spoke quietly, glancing around to make sure Thomas was not within earshot. Everyone knew what was happening in that house on the edge of town, but nobody did anything about it. A man's wife was his property in the eyes of the law, and what happened behind closed doors was considered his business alone. Zeke had never put much stock in laws that protected cruel men. He had grown up poor in Texas, the youngest of 6 children, and his father had been a hard man but never cruel. His mother had died when Zeke was 15, and his father had followed 2 years later, leaving Zeke to make his own way in the world. He had worked ranches from the Rio Grande to the Montana Territory, saving his money and learning everything he could about cattle and horses. He was a good cowboy, honest and hardworking, and he had plans to start his own small ranch someday. Those plans had not included falling for a married woman he barely knew, but fate had a way of ignoring plans. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Zeke rode into town for supplies and heard the shouting. He recognized Thomas Morrison's voice immediately, slurred with whiskey and full of rage. The sound was coming from the alley behind the feed store, and Zeke spurred his horse forward without thinking. What he saw made his blood run cold. Thomas had Zara backed against a wall, his meaty hand wrapped around her throat. She was gasping for air, her face turning red as she clawed uselessly at his grip. A basket of vegetables lay scattered at her feet. "I told you to get potatoes, not carrots, you stupid woman," Thomas roared, spittle flying from his lips. "Can't you do anything right?" Zeke was off his horse and across the alley before his conscious mind caught up with his body. He grabbed Thomas by the shoulder and spun him around, his fist connecting with the bigger man's jaw with a satisfying crunch. Thomas stumbled backward, releasing Zara, who collapsed against the wall coughing and gasping for air. "You want to hit someone? Try hitting a man who can fight back," Zeke growled, positioning himself between Thomas and Zara. Thomas wiped blood from his split lip, his eyes focusing on Zeke with drunken fury. "This is none of your business, cowboy. That's my wife, and I'll discipline her how I see fit." "Discipline?" Zeke's voice was dangerously quiet. "That what you call choking a woman half to death over vegetables?" Thomas lunged at him, but Zeke had been in enough brawls to know how to handle a drunk. He sidestepped, letting Thomas's momentum carry him forward, then delivered a hard punch to the man's kidney. Thomas went down on his hands and knees, retching into the dirt. Zeke turned to Zara, who was still pressed against the wall, her eyes wide with terror. But he noticed that terror was not directed at Thomas anymore, but at what would happen next. "Madam, let me help you," he said softly, extending his hand. "You've made it worse," she whispered, her voice hoarse from being strangled. "He'll kill me now." "No, he won't," Zeke said firmly, "because you're coming with me. I can't. I'm his wife." "The law, the hell with the law," Zeke interrupted. "No law worth respecting says a man can beat his wife. Now, you can stay here and wait for him to sober up and finish what he started, or you can trust me and get on my horse." Thomas was starting to get up, murder in his eyes. Zara looked at her husband, then at Zeke, and something shifted in her expression. She had been surviving for so long, just trying to make it through each day. Maybe it was time to actually live. She took Zeke's hand. He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her, his arm coming around her waist to steady her. Thomas was on his feet now, shouting threats and curses, but Zeke just turned his horse and rode away at a steady trot, not looking back. Zara sat stiffly in front of him, acutely aware of how close he was, how his chest pressed against her back, how his arm felt like a shield around her. She should have been afraid. She barely knew this man, but instead she felt something she had not experienced in 2 years: hope. "Where are you taking me?" she asked as they left Red Bluff behind. "The Bar 7 Ranch," Zeke replied. "The owner, Mr. Henderson, is a fair man. His wife Martha runs the household and she's good people. They'll give you a place to stay while we figure out what comes next." "Thomas will come for me," Zara said quietly. "He won't let me go." "Let him come," Zeke said, and there was steel in his voice. "He'll find it a lot harder to push around an entire ranch full of cowboys." The Bar 7 was a sprawling operation with a large ranch house, several barns, and a bunkhouse for the hands. When Zeke rode up with Zara, several cowboys stopped what they were doing to stare. Zeke ignored them and headed straight for the main house. Martha Henderson was a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She took one look at Zara's bruised face and swollen throat and ushered her inside without a single question. "John." She called to her husband. "Get in here." John Henderson was a weathered man who had spent 40 years working cattle. He listened as Zeke explained the situation, his expression growing darker with each word. When Zeke finished, John was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "She can stay in the spare room off the kitchen," he said. "Martha's been wanting help with the cooking and housework anyway. We'll pay fair wages." "I can't pay you," Zara said quickly. "I don't have any money. Thomas kept everything." "Don't want your money, girl," Martha said firmly. "You'll earn your keep helping me around here, and that's all that matters. Now, let's get some salve on those bruises and get some food in you. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks." It was true. Thomas had started rationing her food over the past months, claiming she was not working hard enough to deserve 3 meals a day. Zara had lost weight she could not afford to lose, her dresses hanging loose on her frame. Martha settled her at the kitchen table and brought out leftover roast beef, fresh bread, and butter. The smell alone made Zara's stomach growl painfully. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. "Go on, eat," Martha encouraged. "Don't be shy." Zara took a tentative bite, then another, and before she knew it, she was eating like she had been starved, which was not far from the truth. Martha and John exchanged knowing looks but said nothing, just let her eat in peace. Zeke stood in the doorway, watching her, that protective feeling in his chest growing stronger. He told himself it was just because she needed help, that any decent man would have done the same. But he knew it was more than that. There was something about Zara Morrison that had gotten under his skin from the moment he first saw her. "You did good, son," John said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Took guts to stand up to Morrison. He's got a reputation for being vicious." "Don't care about his reputation," Zeke said. "Only cared about getting her away from him." That night, Zara lay in the small but clean room off the kitchen, staring at the ceiling. The bed was soft, softer than anything she had slept on in years. Thomas had made her sleep on a thin pallet on the floor for the past 6 months, saying she had not earned the right to share his bed. At the time, she had been grateful, as it meant he left her alone. She touched her throat gently, feeling the bruises Thomas's fingers had left. She should be terrified about what came next. Thomas would not let this go. He would come for her, would drag her back and make her pay for the humiliation of being taken by another man. The law was on his side. She was his wife, his property. But for the first time in 2 years, Zara felt a spark of defiance. Maybe the law was wrong. Maybe she did not have to accept this life of pain and fear. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to be free. Thomas Morrison showed up 3 days later, just as Zara had known he would. She was in the kitchen helping Martha make bread when one of the ranch hands came running in to announce that her husband was at the front gate, demanding she be returned to him. Zara's hands stilled in the dough, her heart hammering against her ribs. Martha immediately put a hand on her shoulder. "You stay right here. John and the boys will handle this." But Zara shook her head. "No, I need to face him. I need to tell him myself." "You don't owe him anything," Martha said firmly. "I know," Zara replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "But I need to do this. I need to say the words." She walked out onto the front porch, Martha right behind her. Thomas was indeed at the gate, looking worse for wear. His jaw was bruised where Zeke had hit him, and his clothes were dirty and wrinkled. But his eyes were clear today, no whiskey clouding them, which somehow made him more dangerous. John Henderson stood at the gate with Zeke and 3 other ranch hands, a clear barrier between Thomas and the house. Thomas's face twisted with rage when he saw Zara. "Get out here, woman," he shouted. "You're coming home with me right now." Zara walked down the porch steps slowly, her legs trembling but her head held high. She stopped a safe distance away, the line of cowboys between her and her husband. "No," she said clearly. "I'm not coming back, Thomas. The hell you're not. You're my wife, a wife you beat and starved and choked," Zara said, her voice growing stronger. "A wife you treated worse than a dog. I'm done, Thomas. I won't live like that anymore." "You don't have a choice," Thomas bellowed. "The law says you belong to me." "I can have the sheriff drag you back. Try it," John Henderson said calmly. "But you should know that my wife and I will testify to the condition this young woman was in when she arrived here. Those bruises tell a story, Morrison, and not one that makes you look good." "A man has a right to discipline his wife," Thomas sputtered. "Maybe," John agreed. "But there's discipline and there's attempted murder. You crossed that line when you tried to strangle her in public. We've got witnesses who saw it." Thomas's eyes darted around, looking for support, but found none. The other ranch hands stared at him with undisguised contempt. In the West, men could be hard and rough, but there was a code, and beating women was considered the act of a coward. "You'll regret this, Zara," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "You think you can just leave me. You think this cowboy is going to take care of you. He'll use you up and throw you away, and then where will you be?" "Anywhere would be better than with you," Zara said, and the truth of those words rang out clear and strong. Thomas stared at her for a long moment, then spat in the dirt. "Fine. Keep the worthless tramp. I'll get the marriage annulled. You're damaged goods anyway. No decent man will want you now." He turned his horse and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Zara stood there, watching him go, feeling like chains had just fallen from her body. She was free. Legally, she was still married, but Thomas's threat to get an annulment was the best news she could have hoped for. If he followed through, she would truly be free. Her legs gave out suddenly, and she would have fallen if Zeke had not been there to catch her. He scooped her up effortlessly, carrying her back to the house. "You did good," he murmured. "You were so brave." "I don't feel brave," Zara admitted, her voice shaking now that the confrontation was over. "I feel terrified." "That's what bravery is," Zeke said. "Being terrified and doing it anyway." Over the next weeks, Zara settled into life at the Bar 7 Ranch. She worked alongside Martha in the big house, cooking and cleaning and learning how to manage a household properly, not the frantic survival she had practiced with Thomas. Martha was a patient teacher and quickly became the closest thing to a mother Zara had known since losing her own. The work was hard but satisfying. Zara found she actually enjoyed cooking when it was not accompanied by the threat of violence if the meal was not perfect. She learned to make Martha's famous apple pie, to render lard, to preserve vegetables for the winter. Her hands, which had been raw and cracked from Thomas's neglect, began to heal. The bruises faded. She gained back the weight she had lost, her dresses fitting properly again. But the biggest change was internal. Zara had spent 2 years making herself small, trying to be invisible, walking on eggshells to avoid Thomas's wrath. Now, slowly, she was remembering who she had been before. She laughed at John's terrible jokes. She sang while she worked. She allowed herself to have opinions and express them. She was becoming herself again. And through it all, there was Zeke. He was always nearby, not hovering but present. He would come in from working cattle to find her in the kitchen, and they would talk while she cooked. He told her about his childhood in Texas, about his dreams of owning his own small ranch someday, about the places he had traveled. She told him about her life before Thomas, about growing up in Missouri, about her parents who had loved her and each other deeply. "That's what marriage should be," Zara said one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "What my parents had. They were partners, best friends. My father would have cut off his own hand before raising it to my mother." "That's how it should be," Zeke agreed. He was whittling a piece of wood, his hands skilled and sure. "My parents were the same way. Pa was tough, but he was fair, and he treated Ma like she was the most precious thing in the world. You want that someday?" Zara asked, then immediately felt her cheeks heat. It was too forward a question, too revealing of her own thoughts, but Zeke just looked at her, his gray eyes steady and warm. "Yes, madam, I do, with the right woman." The air between them seemed charged with unspoken words. Zara looked away first, her heart pounding. She could not afford to hope. She was still married, still legally bound to Thomas even if he was out of her life. And even once she was free, what could she offer a man like Zeke? She was damaged, broken, used up just like Thomas had said. As if reading her thoughts, Zeke said quietly, "You know, my pa used to break horses. Not in a cruel way, but gentle-like, with patience and kindness. He always said you could tell the quality of a horse not by whether it had ever been mistreated, but by whether it could learn to trust again after. The best horses he ever worked with were ones that had been hurt and then healed. They were loyal and brave and true in a way that horses who had never known hardship could never be." Zara looked at him, tears pricking her eyes. "Are you comparing me to a horse?" Zeke's lips quirked in a small smile. "I'm saying that what happened to you doesn't define you, Zara. What you do next does. And from where I'm sitting, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. 2 months after Zara arrived at the Bar 7, word came that Thomas had indeed filed for an annulment. He was claiming that Zara had failed in her wifely duties, a humiliating accusation, but one that Zara welcomed because it meant freedom. John Henderson hired a lawyer from Sacramento to handle Zara's side of things, refusing to let her worry about the cost. The legal process took 3 months, months during which Zara lived in limbo, not quite free but no longer trapped. She and Zeke grew closer during that time, though both of them held back from acknowledging what was growing between them. It did not seem right, not while she was still technically married, but the glances lasted longer. The accidental touches of hands became more frequent. The conversation stretched later into the evening. Everyone at the ranch could see what was developing, and they approved. Zeke Norton was a good man, and Zara Morrison deserved happiness after everything she had been through. It was a cold December morning when the lawyer arrived with the papers. The annulment had been granted. In the eyes of the law, Zara's marriage to Thomas Morrison had never legally existed. She was free. Zara held the papers with shaking hands, reading them over and over to make sure they were real. Martha hugged her tightly, both women crying happy tears. John shook her hand solemnly, congratulating her. And Zeke, who had ridden in from checking the fence line just as the lawyer was leaving, looked at her with such open hope in his eyes that Zara's breath caught. That evening, after supper had been cleared away and the dishes washed, Zeke found Zara on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the winter chill. The stars were brilliant overhead, unpolluted by city lights. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "I'd like that," Zara replied. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, just existing together in the peaceful night. Finally, Zeke cleared his throat. "I've been wanting to say something to you for a while now," he began, "but the timing never seemed right. Now, though, well, I figure if I don't say it now, I might never work up the courage again." Zara turned to look at him, her heart hammering. "What is it?" "I love you, Zara," Zeke said simply. "I've loved you since that day in the general store when you tried to reach that flower, and I saw the strength in you, fighting to survive. I loved you when you had the courage to leave Thomas. I loved you every day since, watching you heal and grow and become the amazing woman you were always meant to be. And I know I don't have much to offer. I'm just a cowboy with some money saved and big dreams. But if you'll have me, I promise I will spend every day of my life making sure you know you're cherished and valued and loved." Zara felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since you lifted down that flower, since you looked at me like I was a person worth protecting. I was so scared to hope, so afraid to believe that something good could happen to me. But you make me want to be brave." Zeke reached out and gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "Can I kiss you?" he asked softly. "Yes," Zara breathed. "Please, yes." The kiss was gentle and sweet, a promise of better things to come. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. Zeke reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved wooden bird, the piece he had been working on that evening on the porch months ago. "I made this for you," he said, pressing it into her hand. "It's a sparrow. They're small and people don't pay them much mind, but they're survivors. They're tough and adaptable and beautiful, reminded me of you." Zara clutched the little bird, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect," she managed. "You're perfect." "Far from it," Zeke laughed. "But I'll do my best for you, Zara. That's a promise." They announced their engagement the next morning, to the delight of everyone at the Bar 7. Martha immediately began planning a wedding, insisting it be a proper celebration. John offered to give Zara away, since she had no family of her own, and Zara accepted with gratitude. The wedding was held in February 1878, in the small church in Red Bluff. Zara wore a simple but beautiful dress that Martha had helped her sew, pale blue with delicate white lace. Zeke wore his Sunday best, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished to a shine. The church was packed with ranch hands, townspeople, and everyone who had come to love and respect Zara over the past months. When Zeke said his vows, his voice was strong and clear. "I promise to honor you, to cherish you, to be your partner and your friend. I promise that you will never go hungry, never go cold, never know fear in our home. I promise to love you with everything I am for all the days of my life." Zara's vows were equally heartfelt. "I promise to stand beside you, to support your dreams, to build a life with you filled with love and laughter. I promise to trust you with my heart, my fears, and my hopes. I promise to love you faithfully and truly for all my days." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zeke kissed her tenderly, to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. It was a new beginning, a chance at the life Zara had thought was forever lost to her. They spent their wedding night in a small but clean hotel room in Red Bluff, a far cry from the place where Zara had suffered so much. Zeke was patient and gentle, mindful of her past trauma, letting her set the pace. It was nothing like her experiences with Thomas, who had taken without asking, used without caring. With Zeke, it was about connection, about two people choosing to be vulnerable with each other, about love expressed physically. Afterward, lying wrapped in his arms, Zara felt truly safe for the first time since she was a child. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Zeke asked, pressing a kiss to her hair. "For saving me, for loving me, for giving me a future I can actually look forward to." "You saved yourself," Zeke corrected gently. "You're the one who chose to be brave, to take my hand that day. I just gave you an option. You did the hard work." In the months that followed, Zeke and Zara worked hard to build their life together. Zeke had been saving his money for years, and combined with what Zara had earned working at the ranch, they had enough to make a down payment on a small piece of land just west of Red Bluff. It was 50 acres with a creek running through it, good grazing land for cattle, and a flat area perfect for building a house. They started small, with Zeke and some of the boys from the Bar 7 building a modest 2-room cabin. It was not much, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and filled with their love. Zara planted a vegetable garden, and Zeke bought a small herd of cattle to start their own operation. The work was backbreaking, from dawn until well past dusk most days. But it was satisfying work, building something together, creating a future with their own hands. And through it all, they had each other. Zara discovered she loved ranch life in a way she never could have anticipated. She was good with the animals, gentle but firm, and the cattle responded to her. She learned to ride properly, and soon she was helping Zeke move the herd and fix fences. They were true partners in every sense of the word. One evening, about a year into their marriage, they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset. Zara had her hand resting on her still flat stomach, a secret she had been keeping for a week, waiting for the right moment to share. "Zeke," she said softly, "I have something to tell you." He looked at her, instantly alert to the serious tone in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm more than all right," Zara said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." The expression on Zeke's face was one of pure joy. He let out a whoop of excitement, then immediately looked worried. "Are you sure you're okay? Do you need to sit down? Should you be working so hard?" Zara laughed at his instant transition to overprotective husband. "I'm fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'm strong and healthy, and everything is going to be wonderful." Zeke pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "A baby," he murmured in awe. "We're going to be parents." "Yes," Zara confirmed, feeling tears of happiness prick her eyes. "We are." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Zeke drove Zara crazy with his constant worrying. He did not want her lifting anything heavy, insisted she rest frequently, and generally treated her like she was made of glass. It was sweet, but also frustrating, as Zara felt better than she had in years and wanted to keep working. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she finally told him exasperatedly one day when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I know," Zeke said sheepishly. "I just want to take care of you. I want to make sure nothing happens to you or the baby." Zara's expression softened. She took his hand and placed it on her swelling belly, where the baby had just started to move. "Feel that? Our baby is strong, just like his or her parents. Everything is going to be fine." Zeke felt the flutter of movement under his palm, and his eyes went wide with wonder. It made everything real in a way it had not been before. That was his child, his and Zara's, a new life they had created together out of love. Their son was born on a warm May evening in 1879, with Martha Henderson serving as midwife. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zeke, pacing outside the bedroom, thought he might lose his mind with worry. But when he finally heard the baby's first cry, strong and healthy, relief flooded through him. Martha emerged with a smile on her face. "You have a son," she announced. And Zara did beautifully, Both mother and baby are healthy." Zeke rushed into the bedroom to find Zara propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up at him with such love and pride that his heart felt too big for his chest. "Meet your son," she said softly. Zeke carefully took the baby, amazed at how small and perfect he was. The infant had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were a deep blue that would eventually change. "He's beautiful," Zeke breathed, "just like his mama." They named him Jacob Thomas Norton, the middle name a deliberate reclaiming of something that had once represented pain. Zara wanted to prove that the name did not have to be associated with cruelty and violence. It could represent the life and love that had come from surviving that darkness. Little Jacob was a good baby, healthy and generally content. Zara took to motherhood naturally, her own loving upbringing giving her a template to follow. And Zeke was a devoted father, coming in from working the ranch to hold his son, to sing to him, to simply marvel at the miracle of his existence. As Jacob grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Word had spread about Zeke's honesty and fair dealing, and their herd grew steadily. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and secure, which was more than many could say. One day, when Jacob was 2 years old, Zara was in town for supplies when she saw Thomas Morrison for the first time since the confrontation at the Bar 7. He was coming out of the saloon, looking even more worn down than before. His business had failed, she had heard, and he had taken to drinking heavily and gambling away what little he had left. Their eyes met across the street, and for a moment, Zara felt that old fear clench in her stomach. But then Jacob squeezed her hand, and she looked down at her beautiful son with his bright eyes and happy smile. She looked back at Thomas and felt only pity. Thomas seemed to read something in her expression because his shoulders slumped. He started to cross the street toward her and Zara's hand tightened on Jacob's. But when Thomas reached them, he did not look angry or threatening. He looked defeated. "You look good, Zara," he said quietly. "Happy." "I am," Zara replied, her voice steady. Thomas looked down at Jacob, then away quickly. "That's good. You deserve that." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I was wrong. The way I treated you, it was wrong. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry." Zara was stunned. She had never expected an apology, had never thought Thomas capable of that kind of self-reflection. "Thank you," she managed. "I hope you find peace, Thomas. I truly do." He nodded, gave her one last look, then walked away. Zara watched him go, feeling something release in her chest that she had not even realized she was carrying. It was not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but it was a step toward letting go of the last hold that darkness had on her. She picked up Jacob and held him close, grateful beyond words for the life she had now. When she got home and told Zeke about the encounter, he held her for a long time, understanding what it meant without needing to say much. "You're free now," he said simply. "Completely free." And he was right. Zara realized that she had been carrying the weight of that trauma for years, letting it define her in ways she had not fully acknowledged. But Thomas's apology, inadequate as it was, had somehow released her from that. She could let it be part of her past, without letting it control her future. The years passed peacefully. When Jacob was 3, Zara gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Rose, a sweet-natured little girl with her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair. 2 years after that came another son, Matthew, who was more mischievous than his siblings combined but equally loved. Their ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added onto the cabin, expanding it into a proper house with multiple bedrooms and a large kitchen where Zara loved to cook. The irony was not lost on her that she had been beaten for refusing to cook for Thomas, but now found genuine joy in preparing meals for her family. The difference was love. Everything done with love and choice rather than force and fear changed the nature of the act entirely. Zeke never forgot what Zara had been through, and he made sure to show his appreciation in both big and small ways. He never raised his voice to her in anger, never used his size or strength to intimidate. He asked her opinion on ranch matters and valued her input. He split the household duties, helping with the children and the cooking and cleaning when he could. He treated her as an equal partner, just as her parents had modeled for her, and Zara, in turn, supported Zeke's dreams. When he wanted to expand into horse breeding, she encouraged him and helped train the young horses. When he considered running for the local cattlemen's association, she told him he would be perfect for the role. They built each other up, made each other stronger and better. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zeke surprised Zara by taking her back to Red Bluff, to the very spot where he had first lifted down that bag of flour for her in the general store. The store had changed owners since then, but the shelves were arranged similarly. "This is where I first saw you," Zeke said, standing in front of the flour shelf. "Where I first knew that you were someone special." "I was a mess," Zara protested, though she was smiling, "bruised and scared and barely holding myself together." "You were the strongest person I had ever met," Zeke corrected. "You just did not know it yet, and I knew right then that I wanted to be part of your life. I wanted to see you smile for real, laugh without fear, live without looking over your shoulder. I wanted to be the person who helped make that possible." Zara felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind that came from overwhelming love and gratitude. "You did more than make it possible," she said. "You gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. You gave me a home, a family, a love I did not think existed outside of storybooks. You gave me myself back." Zeke pulled her close, right there in the general store, and kissed her tenderly. "And you gave me everything I ever wanted, a partner, a love, a purpose. You made me better than I was." That evening, over a special dinner at the hotel, Zeke presented Zara with a gift. It was a locket on a delicate gold chain. Inside were tiny photographs of their 3 children, their faces captured by the traveling photographer who had come through Red Bluff the previous summer. "So you can carry them close to your heart always," Zeke explained as he fastened it around her neck. Zara touched the locket, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect. You're perfect." "Not perfect," Zeke said with a grin. "But perfect for you, that's all that matters." As their children grew, Zara made sure to teach them the lessons she had learned. She taught Sarah that she never had to accept mistreatment, that her worth was inherent and not dependent on anyone else's approval. She taught her sons that real strength came from protecting those weaker than yourself, from treating everyone with respect, from using words before fists. And she taught all of them that love was supposed to be safe, supportive, and kind. Jacob, their eldest, grew into a thoughtful young man who shared his father's love of ranching and his mother's compassion. Sarah became a schoolteacher, determined to educate children and especially young women about their rights and worth. Matthew, true to his mischievous nature, became a lawyer, fighting for those who could not fight for themselves, inspired by his mother's story of survival and eventual triumph. Through all of it, Zeke and Zara remained deeply in love. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their day. They still held hands when they walked. They still found joy in the simple act of being together. The passion had not faded but rather deepened into something richer and more profound. On a crisp autumn evening when they were in their mid-40s, Zara and Zeke sat on their porch as the sun set behind the hills. Their children were grown now, starting families of their own. The ranch was successful and stable. They had built a good life, a life filled with love and purpose. "Do you ever think about that day in the alley?" Zara asked, her head resting on Zeke's shoulder. "When you pulled Thomas off me?" "Sometimes," Zeke admitted. "I think about how close I came to not being there. I almost did not ride into town that day. Had some work I could have been doing on the ranch, but something told me I needed to go, and I listened." "Fate," Zara said softly. "Maybe it was fate, or maybe it was just luck. Either way, I'm grateful for it every single day." "Me too," Zeke said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You know what I remember most about that day?" "What?" "The look in your eyes when you decided to trust me. It was terrifying and brave and beautiful all at once. You took a leap of faith, and I've spent every day since trying to be worthy of that trust." "You have been," Zara assured him. "Every single day you've been more than worthy. You saved my life, Zeke, not just by getting me away from Thomas, but by showing me what love actually looks like, by being patient while I healed, by choosing me every day over and over again." "Always," Zeke said firmly. "I'll always choose you." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead. Zara thought about the woman she had been, broken and terrified in that alley, and the woman she was now, whole and loved and free. The journey between those two versions of herself had been long and sometimes painful, but every step had been worth it. "Zeke," she said suddenly, "do you remember what you said to me that day, after you fed me at the ranch?" Zeke thought back, remembering that evening when Zara had been so thin and scared, eating Martha's cooking like it was the first real meal she had in months. "I said a lot of things that day. You said, 'You'll never cook for him again,'" Zara recalled. "You said it with such certainty, like you could see the future and knew everything would be all right. I did not believe you then. I thought it was impossible, but you were right." "Of course I was right," Zeke said with a teasing grin. "I'm always right." Zara laughed and elbowed him gently in the ribs. "Don't get cocky, Cowboy. I still win most of our arguments." "That's because you're smarter than me," Zeke said easily, "and more stubborn, but I would not have it any other way." As they prepared for bed that night, moving through the familiar routine they had developed over decades of marriage, Zara caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. She was older now, with lines around her eyes and threads of silver in her dark hair. But her eyes were bright and her smile was genuine. She looked happy because she was happy. She thought about the girl she had been, young and naive, thinking Thomas's charm meant he would be a good husband. She wished she could go back and warn that girl, save her from years of pain. But she also knew that without that darkness, she might never have found this light. Without surviving Thomas, she might never have truly appreciated Zeke. It was a terrible trade, and she would never recommend suffering to anyone. But she also could not deny that her struggles had made her who she was, had given her an appreciation for kindness and love that perhaps she would not have had otherwise. She had learned what strength really meant. She had learned that she could survive anything. She had learned that asking for help was not weakness but wisdom. Years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch that Zeke and Zara had built from nothing became a legacy, passed down to their children and then their children's children. It stood as a testament to what could be built from love and partnership and mutual respect. Zeke and Zara grew old together, their hair turning white, their steps slower, but their love never diminishing. They remained best friends, partners in every sense, devoted to each other until the very end. When Zeke passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Zara held his hand and told him she loved him one last time. She knew he heard her, could see it in the slight smile on his peaceful face. She lived another 3 years after Zeke, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling them stories of the early days, of how she and their grandfather had built this family from nothing but determination and love. She told them about the importance of kindness, of standing up for those who could not stand up for themselves, of choosing love over fear every single time. When Zara passed in her sleep at 81, she was buried next to Zeke on a hill overlooking their ranch. The entire town of Red Bluff turned out for her funeral, along with family members who had traveled from all over California and beyond. Person after person stood up to share stories about how Zara had touched their lives, how her strength and compassion had inspired them, how her love had made the world a better place. Sarah stood at her mother's grave and told the story that Zara had shared with her children many times over the years. She told them about the woman who had been beaten for refusing to cook, about the cowboy who had fed her and promised she would never cook for that cruel man again, about the love that had grown from that act of kindness. She told them how Zara had turned her pain into purpose, her suffering into strength, her brokenness into beauty. My mother's life was a testament to the power of resilience, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. She could have let her past define her, could have remained broken and bitter. But instead, she chose to heal. She chose to love. She chose to build a life of meaning and purpose. And in doing so, she showed all of us what is possible when we refuse to give up, when we believe that better days are coming, when we have the courage to accept help and the wisdom to pay that help forward. As the sun set over the Norton Ranch that evening, 3 generations gathered on the porch of the house Zeke and Zara had built. They told stories and laughed and cried together, celebrating the lives of 2 remarkable people who had loved deeply and lived fully. The ranch continued on, generation after generation, a lasting legacy of what 2 people could build when they chose love over fear, partnership over domination, healing over bitterness. And though Zeke and Zara were gone, their love story lived on, told and retold, inspiring others to believe that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always hope for a brighter tomorrow. In the dusty streets of Red Bluff, where Zara had once stumbled in pain and fear, children now played safely. Women walked with their heads held high, knowing they had rights and worth. And on occasion, when someone was hurting and scared and saw no way out, there was always someone willing to extend a hand, to offer help, to say with certainty, "You deserve better. Let me help you find it." That was Zara and Zeke's true legacy. Not just the ranch or the family, but the ripple effect of kindness, the multiplying power of love, the enduring truth that one person choosing to help another could change everything. That a cowboy lifting down a bag of flour could be the first step toward a lifetime of love. That feeding someone who was starving in body and soul could be the beginning of healing. That standing up to cruelty, even when it was dangerous, could save a life and build a future. Their story became legend in Red Bluff and beyond. It was told to young couples starting out, a reminder of what marriage should be. It was told to women suffering in silence, proof that escape was possible and better days waited. It was told to men, a challenge to be the kind of person who protected rather than harmed, who lifted up rather than tore down. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, Zeke and Zara were together still. Their love transcending even death, eternal and unbreakable, a light that would never fade.